Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a dense stack of sources, reports, public filings, sometimes even internal notes, and we really just distill them into the knowledge you need. The goal is to make sure you're well-informed without having to slog through all that raw data yourself.
And today we're doing a highly specialized audit, really. We're focusing on T.L Tedford Enterprises Inc., or TLTE, and its foundational readiness for some major external engagements.
This one feels particularly insightful, I think, because the source material is just exceptionally fresh.
It really is. It's dated literally this morning, January 2nd, 2026. And this material, it gives us this critical sort of dual view.
A dual view. How so?
Well, on one side, you see the company's external projection, the story, the narrative they're actively pushing out into the market.
Okay.
But on the other, we have their internal administrative reality. Specifically, we have the verifiable status of their compliance, the stuff they need to actually receive significant federal funding.
And that dual perspective is everything, isn't it? We're moving beyond just, analyzing press releases.
Exactly.
We're dealing with hard, auditable status checks. So for you, the listener, our mission today is really defined by three central questions that this combined source material helps us answer.
Right, and these questions basically tell us whether TLTE is truly ready for the major leagues.
But what's the first one?
First, we need to analyze the narrative. How is TLTE publicly positioning its core technology, the Tedford Global Mesh System? What are they really claiming about its role in global safety and communications infrastructure? That part establishes the scale of their ambition.
Okay, so that's the what. Then second, and this is really the technical heart of our analysis today, we have to verify the administrative mechanics.
The plumbing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What specific, sometimes kind of obscure bureaucratic milestones confirm that TLTE is officially obligation ready for federal funding. And this is the verifiable difference between just pitching for a contract and being cleared to get the money, instantly.
And that's a huge difference. Then finally, we connect those two things. We connect their communication strategy to their formal political engagement. How does this really aggressive public posture align with the organization's verifiable federal lobbying and its registration footprint?
Right.
This synchronization check, it tells us if the narrative they're selling is actually supported by the necessary high-level political and administrative machinery that you absolutely need for these huge infrastructure projects.
The source context is what makes this deep dive so potent, I think.
Yeah.
We have what's being called a TLTE readiness report.
Yeah.
And it expertly combines the public index data, so what their executives are saying on social media, what's logged in Washington lobbying systems, with these highly specific internal confirmation screenshots.
And those screenshots are key. They verify their status in mandatory federal systems like SAM.gov and even some specialized DLA, that's Defense Logistics Agency checks.
So this blend gives us both the narrative they're pushing and the cold, hard, verifiable status of their administrative compliance.
That combination is really the gold standard for any kind of assessment. The public narrative creates the opportunity, but it's the administrative checklist that determines if that opportunity can actually be seized.
So we're checking to see if the structure and the compliance are robust enough to support these massive external claims they seem to be making.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting right at the top. Let's focus on the public face of the operation. How is TLTE presenting itself to the world, especially when it comes to global safety and communications infrastructure?
Right. What's the story they're telling?
Our public scan, which was indexed just this morning, shows a highly deliberate and, it seems very synchronized, this communication strategy.
They're not sitting back, that's for sure.
No. The leadership is actively driving the message. We're seeing active news release activity. And it's focused on these high-level stakeholders, primarily coming through Mike Motrici's LinkedIn feed.
And the platform choice there is deeply strategic. You have to understand that. LinkedIn, for these kinds of B2G business to government and, high-level B2B infrastructure plays, it functions almost like a targeted industry wire service.
Right. It's not like they're just posting on Twitter.
No, not at all. It avoids the clutter of mass media, and it puts the announcement directly in front of procurement officers, legislative staff, defense, and auto executives.
People who actually matter.
The people who matter for a foundational infrastructure deal, exactly. It lends this immediate executive credibility and, professionalism.
So one of Motrici's core public posts, it positions TLTE as launching a groundbreaking project. Now, that's not just, fluffy language.
Not at all.
It seems to be a strategic component of their outreach. The Post doesn't just inform the market. It actively invites leaders and stakeholders to engage. It gives direct avenues for contact. It directs traffic to the company's site. It's signaling that they are actively in the market for these high-level conversations and partnerships.
And that is the definition of proactive signaling in the contracting space. They're creating a controlled, high-friction entry point for inbound leads. A traditional press release, it just goes out to the world.
Right, it's a shotgun blast.
It is. Whereas a targeted LinkedIn post from a key executive, that directs specific, qualified traffic. This step confirms that their outreach is not passive at all. It's designed to capture the attention of high-level decision makers, the kind of people capable of funding or leveraging a global mesh network.
I'm really struck by the specificity of the follow-up, though. It moves way beyond a generic groundbreaking claim. This is where we get into the real substance of how they're positioning themselves. We saw a second, much more detailed post, an open letter to the global auto and defense industry.
And this is a phenomenal insight into their market targeting. It's an explicit, targeted call to action that names two globally regulated, safety-critical, and infrastructure-dependent sectors, auto and defense.
It's a very specific pairing.
It is, and these are sectors characterized by massive scale, really stringent safety requirements, and, crucially, a consistent reliance on government regulatory and budgetary support.
But why lump auto and defense together like that? I mean, on the surface, they seem like wildly different ecosystems.
At first glance, yes, they do. But if you dig down, they share this profound structural need for resilient, low-latency, secure communications everywhere.
Okay, go on.
So the auto industry is moving toward autonomous and semi-autonomous systems, right? And those systems rely on constant real-time data exchange for safety. Think V2X, vehicle-to-everything communication.
Right. The car needs to talk to the traffic light, to other cars.
To everything. And defense, well, they need redundant, global, hardened communications that can bypass traditional, vulnerable infrastructure. So what TLTE is doing is strategically positioning its mesh system as the single underlying solution that can service both of these distinct but equally critical demands for always-on global connectivity.
So they're the common denominator.
They're pitching themselves as the common denominator for secure global communication.
So in that open letter, the language they used to describe the Tedford Global Mesh System, I mean, that seems to be the defining element of their public posture. They define it as a backbone solution for universal safety communications.
Yes.
Let's really break down that specific phrasing. Why is universal safety so potent in this specific context?
This phrasing it's a masterclass in strategic messaging aimed directly at the public funding apparatus. By choosing the term universal safety, they immediately elevate the mesh system beyond, a typical commercial telecom product.
How so?
Well, safety infrastructure, especially communications infrastructure that's essential for public welfare, is often classified as a public good or critical national infrastructure CNI.
So they aren't selling bandwidth, they're selling resilience, they're selling liability mitigation.
Exactly. When a system is framed as CNI, the whole discussion shifts. It shifts from whether it's profitable to whether it is necessary.
And that's a whole different ballgame.
It is. It creates a direct justification for governmental and defense investment, for grants, subsidies, and for these large, stable, long-term contracts. They are explicitly invoking the highest priority policy area for any national government, protecting life and property.
But isn't that risk overpromising or, maybe even attracting immediate regulatory scrutiny if they're claiming responsibility for universal safety? I mean, that's a massive liability to take on just from a public relations standpoint.
That's a fair counterpoint, and it really underscores the calculated risk they're taking here. They are betting that the opportunity for massive infrastructure contracts outweighs the regulatory hassle.
Okay.
When you pitch to the Defense Logistic Agency or congressional committees focused on infrastructure appropriations, you have to use language that resonates with national security mandates. Universal safety hits that target perfectly. It frames the product as essential national security hardware, not just, a service upgrade.
And what about that other key term they used? Backbone solution.
Backbone solution is equally important. In telecommunications, the backbone is the fundamental, highest capacity infrastructure that all the smaller networks and services rely on.
Right, it's the foundation.
It's the foundation. By claiming that status, TLTE is positioning itself not as a vendor who fills a gap, but as the foundational layer itself. If their mesh system is the backbone, Then defense systems, auto navigation, emergency services, commercial data flows, they all become dependent clients.
Which grants the system a kind of foundational importance.
Yes, and that justifies massive, sustained governmental investment because you don't swap out the backbone easily. It's not something you do every few years.
So if you're assessing the trajectory of this company, the messaging is clearly aimed at establishing TLTE as a critical global infrastructure provider, one that's ready to address these really high-stakes sectors like auto and defense. It's a very high-stakes pitch.
And that level of ambition, it requires absolute consistency, which leads us to the findings on amplification.
Right, because it's not just one person saying this.
No. The source material confirms that Terry Tedford, the company namesake and co-founder, is not just aware of this messaging. He is actively engaging in public social amplification. He's reposting Motrici's exact messages.
Why is that critical? I mean, couldn't that just be standard corporate teamwork?
You might think so, but in high-stakes contracting, especially for infrastructure projects that require multi-year commitments and massive funding, that executive alignment is non-negotiable. It's a key signal.
Okay, so what would be the red flag then?
Well, if Terry Tedford, the foundational figure, were posting about something totally unrelated, say, purely commercial consumer tech, it would fragment the corporate identity. It would suggest a lack of unified focus on this core safety backbone narrative.
So the fact that they're both singing from the same hymn sheet is the point.
Exactly. The unified action of these named individuals ensures visibility and consistency. It confirms the circulation of the same specific news release language across all their key public feeds.
It reinforces that the vision of being a global safety infrastructure provider is the corporate North Star, and it's sanctioned from the very top.
Precisely. This organizational cohesion, it provides tremendous confidence to external stakeholders. If you are a high-level government official or a defense procurement executive and you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investment, you need assurance that the company's vision is stable.
You don't want them to pivot 6 months from now.
No, you need to know it won't be abandoned due to internal disagreement or shifting priorities.
Yeah.
TLTE is projecting maximum stability and resolve in this key area.
So to sum up this first part, Section 1 tells us they are aggressively signaling their readiness to play in the global critical infrastructure sandbox. And they're using the precise language necessary to justify federal and defense-level funding.
Yes.
But, as we discussed, ambition needs a foundation. A powerful narrative is pretty useless if the administrative house isn't in order.
It's the perfect segue, really. The narrative creates the possibility. The administrative status dictates the timeline. We now have to move from the eloquent public pitch to the necessary and often pretty opaque internal verification checks.
Right. So let's transition from that external narrative to the internal verification checks.
Mm-hmm.
Are they administratively and technically ready to receive the kind of immense funding that a universal safety backbone would actually demand?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Before any federal funds can move, and I mean not just contracts, but actual payment, there's this mandatory bureaucratic screening process. We need to confirm that TLTE has cleared these hurdles, and the foundation of this whole system is the System for Award Management, or SAM.gov.
Mm-hmm.
What did the internal check confirm about their status?
The source material is completely unequivocal on this point. The organization's record in SAM.gov is confirmed as active, up, and current. Now, this might seem basic, but it is the absolute cornerstone of federal readiness.
So for listeners who maybe don't deal with federal contracts every day, why is maintaining an active SAM status so critical, especially at this juncture for them?
Well, active status is both the entry ticket and the legal prerequisite. If your status is lapsed or expired or pending, the entire contracting and payment process just stops dead.
It's a full stop.
A full stop. Think of it like keeping your professional license current. If it expires, you can't practice no matter how good you are. And for large, high-profile organizations, maintaining this status isn't a trivial thing. It requires annual renewal, certification of various entity integrity statements, and ensuring all the data fields align perfectly with other systems.
So the fact that the report confirms it as active means the organization has successfully managed this constant administrative upkeep.
Yes, it sounds simple, but it's a big deal.
It does seem like a low bar, yet you hear about established companies stumbling at the last moment because of simple administrative oversight.
They absolutely do. It happens all the time. Often companies are so focused on the technical proposal that they forget the bureaucratic maintenance. An inactive SAM registration can delay an obligation for weeks or even months, which, in the world of high-velocity government spending, can be catastrophic.
So TLTE being active means they've established this baseline legitimacy and proactive compliance. They've essentially eliminated the expired paperwork risk.
That's right. They've ensured the process doesn't stop before it even starts.
So SAM is the entry ticket. But our source material suggests they've moved well past that and into a highly specialized late-stage verification process. This, to me, is the truly novel finding in the internal reports.
It really is.
We're looking at the CAGE, that's Commercial and Government Entity Code/DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, verification behavior that's indicated in these internal screenshots. This sounds incredibly technical.
It is, but this is where we shift from generalized readiness to evidence of imminent action. So the CAGE code, it's a unique 5-character identifier that the DLA assigns to every single physical location of a contractor.
Okay, so it's tied to a place.
Exactly. It's used government-wide for identifying facilities, verifying addresses, and processing payments. So when funding is about to flow, the government system performs a final verification scrub to ensure data integrity across multiple linked databases.
In the source material, it explicitly defined the operational significance of the behavior they observed in these screenshots. What does that specific behavior really signify in terms of contracting reality?
The report states that this specific pattern of CAGE law verification behavior is, and I'm quoting here, consistent with a late-stage administrative readiness checkpoint that commonly happens right before obligation award issuance.
Okay, right before.
Right before. To put that into plain terms, imagine the government funding pipeline is like a high-security flight. The SAM status proves you have a ticket. This CAGE law check is the final security scan that happens right at the gate. It's confirming your identity matches the boarding pass before they open the door to the plane.
That timing is so precise. It's not triggered by just bidding on a contract. It's triggered by the actual decision to fund. Yes. This brings up a critical distinction that we should probably clarify for the listener, the difference between an award and an obligation.
Yes, this is paramount in federal finance. An award is the legal contractual agreement. It's the signed paperwork. It says, we agree to pay you X amount for Y service.
The promise.
The promise. An obligation is the moment that budgetary resources are legally committed and earmarked by the Treasury. The money is actually set aside and ready to be issued, but the funding system must verify the recipient administratively before it can process that obligation.
So if the system fails this final check,
then the obligation is delayed, sometimes even after the award has been signed.
So this late-stage administrative checkpoint is essentially triggered by the imminent commitment of funds, not just the signing of the contract paperwork.
Exactly. The government is performing its final due diligence to prevent a logistical failure. The system is checking to make sure the recipient record is clean, active, and payable. This check confirms the alignment of the CAGE code with the organization's UEI, the Unique Entity Identifier, which replaced the old DUNS number.
Right.
And it verifies that the primary identifier and the payment location identifier are linked and verified by the DLA. This ensures security and the proper routing of federal funds.
And what exactly are these late-stage checks designed to screen for? What is an entity integrity flag that could block a payment at such a critical juncture?
This is the critical, often hidden administrative risk. An entity integrity flag or an exclusion can stop a payment dead in its tracks. It's often triggered by a mismatch in key administrative data, but more seriously, it looks for signs of legal trouble or non-compliance.
So what kind of issues are we talking about?
Well, these flags can cover a whole spectrum of issues. First, there's system exclusion. Is the company or any of its principals listed in the SAM exclusion list? This means the entity has been debarred or suspended from doing business with the federal government, usually due to fraud, poor performance, or some kind of legal misconduct.
Okay, that's a big one.
A very big one. Then there are tax ID issues. Are there discrepancies between the taxpayer identification number, the TIN, and the registration data? Or for a company involved in universal safety and defense, the check may include verifying compliance with highly specific regulations related to foreign ownership, control, or influence things that could compromise national security.
And I imagine even simple things, like a CAGE code expiring.
Yes, absolutely. Has the CAGE code for that specific facility location expired, or does the address not match the system of record? All of these things can trigger a flag.
So these checks are essentially the system performing the ultimate background scrub. It's making sure that no administrative, legal, or financial scandal can interrupt the flow of these large, obligated federal funds.
Yes. And the presence of this specific verification behavior, the fact that the system is hitting the KGDL API endpoints for verification, confirms that TLTE's record is currently passing this final inspection.
So it suggests the organizational structure and their compliance record are clean enough to avoid these payment integrity flags.
That's right. They have actively minimized the risk of administrative failure at the absolute point of funding.
It's the technical evidence that their administrative machinery is tuned for speed and ready to execute the payment process immediately as soon as the decision to fund is made.
It is.
Okay, let's consolidate this administrative reality because this seems like the core takeaway regarding TLTE's financial viability. Based on these confirmed internal screenshots, the organization is deemed obligation ready.
Yes.
And it's because they've achieved 3 simultaneous verifiable criteria.
That's right. First, the foundation. SAM is active, up, and current, so no entry-level errors. Second, the technical identifiers. The UEI and the CAGE code are valid and aligned. The observation of that late-stage verification activity implies that this crucial linkage has been successfully confirmed by the DLAOD system.
And the third, and maybe the most important, for the speed of funding. The late-stage administrative checks are confirming that there are no entity integrity flags or exclusions that would block payment or obligation.
And this synthesis is really powerful. It means the organization has successfully navigated all the tedious, required federal administrative hurdles. What you're seeing is the administrative system clearing the very last gate that would otherwise introduce friction or delay into the actual commitment and issuance of funds.
It sounds like they've achieved a kind of administrative perfection in the eyes of the Treasury's payment systems.
That's a good way to describe it.
To use a manufacturing analogy, it seems like they've moved beyond just building the car, the product, and have thoroughly pre-tested the payment infrastructure. They've road-tested the pipes to make sure the money can flow at maximum velocity once the switch is flipped.
That's a great way to put it. For any decision maker who's assessing this company, the question is no longer about administrative risk. That box is checked.
It's off the table.
It's off the table. The conversation shifts entirely to technical merit and financial scope because administratively they are ready to transact at scale and at speed.
So the narrative says they're essential for global safety, and the paperwork says they're administratively ready to handle the resultant massive federal commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So now we connect this internal readiness to their political activity. How does this high-stakes public presence align with their formal federal lobbying and registration footprint?
The final piece of the puzzle.
An ambitious project that's being pitched as a backbone solution for universal safety must, by definition, have a formal political footprint in Washington, D.C., where infrastructure and defense budgets are set.
It has to.
For this, we turn to Legistorm, which is the essential public resource for tracking official federal lobbying activity.
Right, and Legistorm provides that necessary public accountability and confirmation that this is not just a commercial venture. It's a strategic engagement with the legislative and executive branches. If you're seeking federal infrastructure deals, you have to document your efforts to influence policy and appropriations.
It's the law. And the source material confirms the existence of a public-facing summary page for T.L Tedford Enterprises Inc. What's the definitive insight from that page?
The insight is really twofold. First, the organization is indexed and visible, which confirms they are actively documenting their political outreach. But second, and most importantly, the summary page explicitly indicates that the organization has lobbied the U.S. government.
So it's not ambiguous.
Not at all. And that single fact provides the necessary political weight to the public narrative we were just discussing.
This finding creates that critical alignment we were looking for then. The open letter to the global auto and defense industry is immediately validated by the concrete evidence of high-level political engagement.
Yes.
It proves they are pursuing the necessary policy and budgetary changes that would be required to enable a major federal deal.
Look, securing contracts for a universal safety backbone involves massive hurdles that only lobbying can address. They aren't lobbying to just, sell office supplies to the government.
Yeah.
They're likely lobbying on very specific policy areas. First, spectrum allocation and regulation, making sure their mesh system has the legal right and necessary permissions to operate globally or domestically.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, critical infrastructure designation. They'd be lobbying to have their technology formally designated as CNI, because that unlocks dedicated funding streams and protective regulations. And third, appropriations language.
So influencing the actual text of the laws.
influencing the specific legislative text within defense or transportation spending bills. That creates a mandate or a preference for their type of resilient global mesh communication system.
It confirms that TLTE is operating in 3 dimensions simultaneously. They're building the tech, they're cleaning up the administrative house, and they're moving the political levers.
Absolutely. They recognize that in the infrastructure space, the government is both the largest potential customer and the regulatory gatekeeper. You have to engage with both. The Legistorm entry confirms the seriousness and the synchronization of their intent.
Now, we did note a fascinating counterpoint within the source material regarding their public political engagement.
Yes.
While formal lobbying is confirmed via Legistorm, the same public scan that caught those high-profile LinkedIn posts showed no senators or representatives were publicly named in the index items, at least within that immediate time frame.
And this is a strategically fascinating observation, especially for a company with such a bold, publicly ambitious mission. It raises a really important question. Why the discretion in their public communications about specific political connections, even while their lobbying is active?
Yeah, that is interesting. Most companies seeking massive infrastructure deals eventually, they tout their political champions. Why keep those names private for now?
Well, there are two main strategic explanations, I think, and they're both related to control and velocity. First, high-level legislative advocacy for these complex, expensive programs often requires discretion.
Quiet conversations.
Very quiet conversations. Negotiations over specific budget lines or regulatory waivers are often conducted quietly to build consensus before any public announcement. Prematurely naming a political champion can trigger partisan opposition. It can politicize a project that TLTE wants to frame as nonpartisan universal safety.
So they're maintaining the image of a technical necessity first, and they're delaying the political fight until the contract is closer to being finalized.
Precisely. They are prioritizing the integrity of the safety infrastructure narrative over the political bragging rights. And second, this ties back to their primary public outreach being that open letter to the global auto and defense industry.
Their focus is on the industry.
Right. Their current public focus is still on industry stakeholder buy-in. They need to demonstrate market demand and technical acceptance from high-profile partners before they lean on specific congressional endorsements. Keeping officials out of the news releases maintains the focus on the product's universal technical appeal.
It sounds like a highly disciplined approach. They're controlling the narrative flow to maximize the impact at the optimal moment, holding their political cards very close to the vest.
It seems so.
Okay, let's pull all 3 of these sections together for the listener. The ambitious public narrative, the pristine internal paperwork, and this verifiable yet discreet political footprint. What's the ultimate context that the source material provides?
The ultimate context is synchronization. The 3 focus areas are perfectly aligned, and that suggests maximum strategic orchestration. Look at the data points.
Go ahead.
1, publicly. They're using aggressive, high-stakes language, global safety, backbone solution driven consistently by top leadership, and their lobbying presence is confirmed.
Okay.
2, internally. Their registration is active, and, most critically, that verification behavior confirms pre-obligation readiness, which means they have minimized their administrative risk down to basically 0.
This alignment means that the organization's external projection, which demands a massive federal commitment, is perfectly synchronized with its internal federal paperwork status, which confirms they can handle that commitment today.
Yes, and that implies a highly sophisticated, disciplined operational structure. TLTE understood that for a project of this scale, administrative failure is often the easiest reason for a government delay or even a cancellation.
Right, the easiest thing to blame.
Exactly. So by proactively achieving and verifying this obligation-ready status, they have removed that risk. They've ensured that when the political or technical decision makers finally give the green light, the money can flow immediately. This is not common. It's a sign of profound organizational preparation.
They have strategically ensured that bureaucracy will not be the reason for delay or for failure. They are administratively ready to scale instantaneously.
That's the bottom line.
Okay, let's offer a final comprehensive summary of the key takeaways for you, the listener, regarding TLTE's position as of this morning, January 2nd, 2026.
First, TLTE is strategically positioning the Tedford Global Mesh System as essential foundational safety infrastructure. They're using powerful, high-stakes language like universal safety and backbone solution. And this messaging, it directly targets the sector's auto and defense, where federal commitment is highest and most critical.
Second, their administrative foundation, is, for all intents and purposes, impeccable. By maintaining an active SAM status, and most importantly, demonstrating that specific KJEDLA verification behavior, they've confirmed they are obligation ready.
Yes. They have actively cleared the final administrative checks necessary to receive federal funds without any inherent bureaucratic delay.
And third, the aggressive public outreach and the internal readiness are completely supported by a formal, verifiable federal lobbying footprint confirmed via Legistorm. This indicates a deeply coordinated strategy to maximize readiness for a major federal engagement,
while also maintaining strategic public discretion regarding specific political figures.
The administrative clock is ticking, and the paperwork is pristine. The organization has done everything within its control to be technically and administratively prepared for a large federal award. And this leaves us with one final provocative thought of the future.
The administrative readiness is confirmed, and the public narrative demands massive scale. The critical question for the future is not about administrative capacity. That's solved. It's really what specific scale of federal investment would be required to trigger that late-stage administrative check we observed into an actual obligation.
That's a good question.
And maybe more critically, given the current pristine status, how quickly might we see that formal financial commitment move from legislative intent to actual issuance of funds? They are administratively on the finish line. Now we just wait for the funding decision to materialize.
A fascinating position for any company to be in. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into TLTE's readiness and public posture. We'll catch you next time.